What's the one thing more gardeners struggle with than almost anything else? It's getting the watering right. It's either overwatering or underwatering, and usually it's overwatering, and more plants die from overwatering than anything else. And that's because if you have poorly draining soil, when the water goes in and it doesn't drain out, what's happening is the air space between the soil particles is being pushed out. The water's staying there because it's not draining well, and the roots can actually drown, so your plants die. Now, that's much more likely to happen in in-ground beds where soil is typically heavier and the water doesn't drain so well. And sometimes it happens in raised beds like these, but it rarely happens in containers and grow bags, and that's because containers have drainage holes and grow bags are porous, so the water is seeping out the sides. So it's hard to overwater containers and grow bags. Now, how can you tell by looking at your plants if they need more or less water? Well, first of all, get a baseline of how your plants look. And a good time to do that is in the early morning when you walk out and everything is fresh, your plants are perky, and sometimes they even have moisture coming out of the leaf margins or the edges, and that's a very good sign. And this is a really good sign too, because it's the middle of the day and they're nice and perky and there's no wilting. But wilting would be the alternative, and sometimes that's the case when the soil is too wet. And that's an indication that you have saturated soil and the leaves are wilting because of extra moisture. So definitely don't water there, just back off and wait for them to self-recover. Now, the other condition could be normal conditions and the leaves are wilting anyway, and that is the case sometimes with dahlias, like right here. Like here's some that are starting to wilt. Now, that's really more of a defensive technique, and they just kind of wilt down until things cool off in the latter part of the day, and then they're going to recover. Or worst case, by early the next morning. And if you see plants that have wilted leaves, but the soil you believe is not oversaturated, the leaves wilt, and then they recover in the evening or by the next morning, that's totally normal and you don't need to do anything. But if you were to come out by the next morning and the leaves are still wilted, you definitely need to water in that case. Now, in my case, for the cues that I'm looking for when it's time to water is a slight sign of wilt, just a slight sign. And that's because I already know my soil is really good because of the compost that I make myself and what I supplement through what I buy, Soil Cubed, which is regionally available here in the Southeast. But when you have soil like that drains really well, but it also holds the right amount of moisture, you know that generally your soil is pretty much sufficient all the time. But by looking at the signs that the plant has given me and a slight sign of wilt, which these aren't even there yet, I know in this case, that's a sign to water. So here's the real secret to knowing whether you need to add water to your soil or not. It's called the finger test. It's very sophisticated. It won't cost you a dime. And yes, you use your finger to do this. And here's how it works. Take that pointer finger and stick it into the soil down to that middle digit, that knuckle right there. See how it's coming up with soil stuck to my finger? That's telling me that there's enough moisture in the soil because the moisture is what's causing those soil particles to stick to my finger. Now, if you didn't have enough moisture in the soil and you stuck your finger in, just like I did, and pulled it back out, and it was just dusty, but it wasn't sticking with the soil particles like you just saw, that's telling me that the soil is too dry and you need to add water. I have one more thing I want to share with you that's going to be very helpful, especially if you have raised beds or in-ground beds. Now, if you're gardening mostly in containers or grow bags, don't worry about this so much because it's hard to overwater those. But in these other situations, when you need to add water, we hear that plants need on average 1 inch of water per week, and that includes what falls from the sky and what we water. But have you ever stopped to think, well, how do I know when I've applied 1 inch of water? Well, I have, and I have the answer for you. 6/10 of a gallon of water, or 77 ounces, equates to 1 inch of water over 1 square foot of space. That's key to know. But how do you know what 6/10 of a gallon looks like? Well, you measure that. So you get a bucket or a pitcher and you measure out that much and then you draw a line. And that's why I brought this in here. I did that, and 77 ounces or 6/10 of a gallon is right there at that red line that I drew. That's a very important line. Okay, so I don't need this water anymore. That was just to figure out where the red line goes. So I'll go ahead and water this container plant. But now that I have that red line, I'm going to fill it back up to here with my watering device of choice, what I typically use to water, and see how long it takes to fill up this pitcher until I get to the red line. Once I get there, knowing how long it took is what I need to know when I'm standing over my plants and watering to know that I've given that plant 1 inch of water over 1 square foot. All right, so I have my empty pitcher. Now I want to fill it to that red line and time how long it takes to do it, and that's the number I need to apply it to my plants. So here we go. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007. Okay, so about 7 seconds. That's what I'm looking for. So as I'm standing over here watering my plants, I know in 7 seconds I've given 1 inch of coverage over 1 square foot of space, and then I move on to the next plant. Very simple. Now, what if you don't have a watering wand or something like this that you use for watering, but maybe you have a watering can and that's how you water? Well, let's take a 1 gallon watering can. When you fill that up and you empty it out over an area where your plants are, once it's empty, that's delivered 1.6 square feet. So just keep that in mind and you'll be good to go with your watering can too. And one simple thing that you should also do, and that is to get a rain gauge. They're very inexpensive, but it gives you great information to let you know how much you need to supplement in addition to the rain that's fallen during the week. Now, water is essential for survival, we know that, but too much of a good thing can be not a good thing. And more plants die from overwatering than underwatering. But you can apply what I share with you today to help you have a much better understanding of what to do.